Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about how a picture book comes together from an illustrator's point of view. If you've ever wondered what happens behind the scenes when an illustrator is hired to make a picture book, or you're an artist interested in the children's publishing world, I think this will be very interesting to you. As of now, I've worked on 2 picture books, one published and one on the way. This video isn't really about writing a picture book, which to me is a completely separate conversation. Instead, it's about the big picture process and what it's like to work as an illustrator on the project. Once you're officially asked to illustrate a picture book, the first thing you have to do is paperwork. You'll sign contracts outlining deadlines and delivery dates for each milestone of the project. If you have an agent, they'll help negotiate and walk you through all of these things to make sure that you're getting the best timeline and compensation for your work. I actually find this part super helpful because once I know the milestones, I can reverse engineer how much time I need for each stage. The stages are usually broken down like this: cover art and character sketches, rough sketches of the full book, sample spreads, about 2 to 4 finished pages, and then the final artwork delivery. And in between all of that, there's a lot of back and forth between the publishing creative team, usually the art director, editor, designer, and sometimes the author too. Now, once I receive the manuscript, the very first thing I do is start sketching out the characters. Sometimes the art notes are super specific, and other times it's as vague as 8-year-old girl, but I find that there are challenges and perks to both. This stage is all about exploration, finding designs that feel right for the story, but also feel natural for me to draw over and over again. After I have a sense of the characters, I start thumbnailing the entire book based on the art notes. Art notes are essentially the notes left behind by the author and sometimes the editor so that you know what the scenes are supposed to feel and look like. These feel a lot like stage directions in a play. At this stage, I like to work quite small and in pencil. Sometimes I'll designate specific sketchbooks for projects or on just some cheap computer paper that I might turn into a book dummy. And a book dummy is essentially just a smaller version of the book blocked out that you can use as a proof or a rough while you're working through the project. I prefer pencil because it smudges and keeps me kind of loose. Pen makes me feel a little bit too precious about the details early on, and that's really not what this stage is about. In all honesty, the tool doesn't really matter at this stage. It's just about getting out the loose shapes and keeping things small and simple. This is where things like page turns, composition, and pacing really start to take shape. It's at this stage that you can start to anticipate how the shapes are going to flow across the page and into the next one. Once I have my thumbnails on real paper, I move on to digitizing everything in my iPad. I primarily work digitally when I'm illustrating for these kinds of projects, and I work almost exclusively in Procreate. I upload each page into the canvas, and at this point it's very important to make sure that you're checking for DPI, color space, and canvas size to make sure that it translates appropriately over to the finished print. And then at this point, once the images are digitized, this is when I start to essentially translate those smudgy, pencil-y, rough drawings over into something that's a little bit more legible for the team to look over and provide any notes. It's a really important stage to make sure that I have interpreted the art notes the way that they have imagined them to show up. So at this stage, I'll just use bubble people, stick figures, scribbles, and even some written notes to kind of explain what's all there, since it is very loose and rough at this stage. Like I said, this is where the really big compositional problems are taken care of before there's too much detail and time and energy put in. So if there are any notes that they feel like need to be changed or edited, this is where we would do that. After some back and forth on the rough sketches, I'll either move straight into finals at this point, or I'll go back and do some finer detail sketches so that they can see that the changes make sense with the character designs applied. And then once those sketches are approved, it's time to move on to the finals, which is my personal favorite part of the process. My final art process essentially goes in this order. I do line work, then shading, then color. I batch the whole book like this, so I'll do all the line work first, and then all the shading and shadows and light, and then I'll do all of the color applications after that. Some people finish all of the pages, one page at a time completely, but for me, batching up this process helps me stay in the flow for what each stage sort of requires. I feel like there's a certain headspace to be in for all of the inking and lining, and then a different headspace for solving all of the shadow and shading problems, and then the same thing for figuring out what colors to use. Doing like this helps me stay consistent throughout the whole project. During this final art process, I will prioritize finishing those 2 to 3 spreads, sample spreads that the publishers are asking for. If feedback on those are good, then I'll move on to finishing the color applications for the rest of the pages. Once everything is complete, I provide final files, usually in a Photoshop document with the layers separated for the text to be altered. I'll usually do a placeholder text, and then the designer will go in and apply the exact font and copy that's going to be used. This is really important to have these layers separated as well, because there could be translations or extended versions of the book published in the future, and so there needs to be enough space and malleability on the files to be able to add that and update that in the future. And then once those files are sent off, the book essentially gets put together through publishing magic. I'll usually get a digital cover proof and then printed proofs in the mail, which is a very exciting time in that process to kind of see all of your hard work come together in something that you can hold, which is super awesome. I'm still honing this process, and this is how I work right now, but I'm curious how these habits will evolve in the future. I'm also developing original manuscripts as both author and illustrator. I haven't had anything that I've written published yet, but I'm working on it, and that is a real challenge that is very different than just illustrating the projects. Maybe I'll talk about that in another video. If you have any questions on what it's like to work on a book as an illustrator, or if you have process tips of your own, feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.